Good morning. This is Barbara Melendez and Christina Ruidas, and we are from Richards Brandt Miller Nelson. And welcome to our webinar on I-9 and E-Verify compliance. And if you have any further questions, feel free to give us a call or communicate with us. Let's start with I-9 compliance. So when we talk about I-9 compliance, we have to always remember that this started in April 30th of 2009. That's when the Department of Homeland Security issued their notice about what their strategy was going to be concerning compliance. Specifically, they address matters regarding what the government was going to be doing to employers. I-9 compliance has become a huge moneymaker for the government, and we're going to go through the inception of 2009 when this was first rolled out to where we are now. Let's fast forward to 2 years after. On October of 2011, when the Department of Homeland Security first realized what monies were being brought in with regards to fine, they calculated that approximately $10 million in fines alone had been brought in to the government based on compliance issues. The compliance issues always held the same, let's say the same format. You get a notice, you have an ICE agent show up at your office, you have X amount of days to provide them with your I-9s and payroll records, and then they audit those I-9s and come back with prospective fines based on the findings that they have, whether they are high fines, low fines, administrative fines, significant fines. It's calculated based on the overall analysis that they do. And there's a very detailed process that is based on the percentage of I-9s that are incorrect. In September of 2012, compare this to 2009, 520 criminal worksite enforcement arrests took place. As you can see, the government was switching from an administrative approach to now a criminal approach to enforcement. Administrative fines went up by 2 million because we went from 10 million in 2011 to 12 million 575 in just administrative fines. Now let's look at what 2013 brought us. In one case alone, the government issued a fine of $34 million to settle allegations of systematic visa fraud and abuse. This was a tech company that was accused of abuse, establishing visas that really didn't have workers. In the past, I-9 enforcement, as you can see, focused on civil fines and penalties rather than administrative fines and penalties. ICE now is aggressively pursuing criminal enforcement. Employers who don't comply with IRCA are now and are found to have unauthorized workers now often can be and are charged with felony criminal violations, knowingly making false statements on I-9 forms, conspiracy to knowingly hire illegal aliens, conspiracy to encourage or induce unauthorized aliens to remain in the United States, evasion of federal employment taxes, mail fraud, wire fraud, document fraud, money laundering, and even alien harboring. It's not a safe world out there if you're messing up on your I-9s. We're not talking about a few $100s or a few $1,000s. We're talking about the ability to continue working or to be behind bars. Let's look at what happened in 2014. Although it hasn't ended, let's look at what's happened in Houston. Two Houston employees pled guilty to racketeering and conspiracy in a series of Chinese restaurants and employment referrals. In Beaumont, Texas, a woman was sentenced to 15 months on immigration charges and tax charges, as well as money laundering. Recently in Missouri, just a few weeks ago, a restaurant manager pled guilty to harboring aliens. And the most recent one that we're aware of is the Grand America, a Utah luxury hotel chain, and they have now been fined with $2 million for hiring illegal workers. One of the things that we have to focus on is what impact does that have on future audits? What direction do you see future audits taking place? What is ICE going to be looking for? As the Grand America was fined the $2 million, one of the things that we believe is going to happen is that agents are going to be applying a higher scrutiny as they evaluate the unlawful workers, as they determine whether or not there is a small number of unlawful workers or a larger number of unlawful workers. There's going to be less breaks. There's going to be less likelihood of reducing fines and a higher likelihood of increasing fines and penalties. Another factor that we're going to be looking at is the fact that we're going to be looking at re-audits. So if you are a company who has already been audited by ICE, the possibilities of being re-audited are much higher. And that has to do with the fact that some of these cases that we presented in our previous slide, some of them were employers who had already been audited. And despite being audited and having been found to have committed some errors on their I-9s and having been fined initially what they considered to be a break or a reduction in their fines, ICE came back, re-audited that, and noticed that not only did they still have errors, not only were they still committing egregious findings of hiring unlawful workers, but now they were found to be knowingly violating because you've already been audited. ICE has already told you what you should be doing. You've already paid the penalty, and despite the same, you're still in trouble. So this increase in re-audits is tremendously problematic for employers because the level of scrutiny is much higher. The possibilities of having not only fines, but criminal sanctions is now higher. Take the example of the Grand America. In 2010, I stepped in and found that they had unlawful employees. Of the group of unlawful employees that they found, they were terminated, and within just weeks of termination, some a few months, they had already returned and were working at the Grand America under aliases. They were rehired by an organization, an employment agency that was created by several employees at the Grand America. And then 10 more employees that had been terminated also came back in and were rehired by a third entity that was created. As you can see, ICE does not like to get smacked in the face when they figure they've given you a break. So be careful with re-audits. Be sure that if you are currently reviewing your I-9s, make sure that they are in perfect condition, that the standards that you have are the highest standards, that they're complying with all the IRCA requirements, and that you don't find yourself in a re-audit where you have significant problems with your I-9s and your hiring practices. So what's the takeaway from all of this? I like to call it the Kate. The first thing you need to do is correct your measures. Look at your hiring practices. Look at your I-9s. Look at who handles your I-9s. And if there's any deficiency, correct it now. The second thing you need to consider is a self-audit. Now, ICE doesn't look at self-audits by the employer very highly because inevitably there's an interest. There's a conflict of interest. I am correcting my own measures. So look at the possibilities of hiring a well-trained and capable I-9 auditor who can step in, look at your process, look at your policy, look at your I-9s, and determine if there are any errors and there's room for improvement. The T in Kate is train. I can't specify enough how important it is to train your employees. Oftentimes, I have employers who have one person who is the god or goddess of the I-9s. Well, what happens if that person goes on vacation? What happens if they go on maternity leave? What happens if they go to a training? Who handles I-9s at that point? Always have a backup plan. Not only train I-9s on how to execute and properly ensure that the I-9s are filled out correctly, but also on not to over-document. There's an increased number of discriminatory practices that are evolving from employers who just want to do the right thing. But they want to do the right thing to such an extent that they are now going overboard. And finally, execute. You've gone through all the trouble of correcting. You've paid someone to come in and audit. You've spent the time training and retraining. Now execute an I-9 compliance plan or an I-9 E-Verify compliance plan that will provide the measures necessary should ICE come knocking at your door and you happen to have a mistake in one of your I-9s.